All right, are we ready? 1, 2, 3. Hey, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome back. Is it welcome back?
Welcome back.
Welcome back, Cotter. So, a few weeks ago, we said goodbye to Professor Joseph, and off he went into the great wild environment that is.
Gumbo.
Yes. Tomatoes in his gumbo. So, we were going to cancel Chalkboard History. And then we decided to change our minds. So we're going to relaunch it, and we're calling it, we are so clever, it's Chalkboard History Volume 2. Volume 2. So Joseph is gone, Chalkboard History Volume 2. So I've been sitting around trying to come up with something clever, which didn't work. And behind the camera, we have Adam Thomas, who came up with a great idea that we should have a Meet the Staff series of Chalkboard Histories and find out, where we're going to go with this thing. So I told Adam, I think that's a good idea. And then I called you.
And then then he called me.
And you are?
I am Jenny, Jenny Peach, and I run the education department and group tours and
a little bit of everything.
I do a little everything.
Genealogy. So I thought it would be fun if we talked to Jenny about not just history, but about her history with the Battle of Franklin Trust, because Jenny was, born and raised here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
one of the few on staff that are like actual locals.
A native Tennessean.
For a long time.
A long time. So I thought it would be fun to talk about when you started, what your thoughts were on just the Battle of Franklin, history in general, and then sort of lead into, whether we're talking about Lincoln or whether we're talking about slavery or the importance of the Civil War. So the floor is yours. Tell us when you started, and actually then tell us about one of the first moments when you're like, wait a second, this is conflicting with what I thought about history.
So I started here, 12 years ago. And I actually was getting married at Carnton. Do you remember that?
Mm-mm.
That's how I got here.
No, I block a lot of things out.
I got married on the front porch. Megan was our coordinator at that time. And they had a cancellation like 2 weeks before I wanted to get married. And she called me and she was like, hey, we have this opening. Do you want to come? And we literally came. It took 30 minutes. We got married on the front porch. And I walked back in, and Megan was like, are you done? I'm like, yeah. I was like, it's hot. It was July 7th. It was so hot. And I was like, I've just always wanted to work here. And she was like, well, we have a guy leaving. Just call Eric. And so I called, and I think like a month later, I was hired. But growing up here.
Oh, what was the interview like?
I don't remember. I try to block that stuff out because I am such a non-confrontational kind of like nervous, in those kinds of situations. So, but I remember you talking a lot about the things where we were going, like what. So
12 years ago would have been 2013, 2012, 2013?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, a lot of things that you said in the interview, like in my head, I'm like, oh my God, good Lord. Like because of what I had grown up around.
You mean like we're going to talk about that slavery is at the core of secession?
Not slavery, but like the states' rights stuff.
Oh, it wasn't really states' rights, it was really slavery?
Yeah, like the whole broader picture
or
of
the
it.
states' right to own slaves.
Right. So we were just,
liberal.
Always taught.
Woke.
Yeah. Woke tears.
Yankee.
So I was like, okay, it registered, but I had just always wanted to work. I don't know why. Carnton was always somewhere that I was drawn to. I kept coming back, taking the tours.
Okay, so got through the interview, got hired, first tour.
First tour, terrifying. Some guy asked me, what type of wood is this on a specific, thing in the house, and I thought, well, that's it, I'm quitting. I'm never going to know all this freaking wood in the house. And then came back, told you, and you were like, no, there's like a book and you can like look it up. And I was like, oh, thank God. But it's fantastic. You really have to, giving tours, aside from the group tours and the school group stuff, giving regular classic tours, you get to connect with people, and I think the biggest thing that you have to do is meet them where they are. Like, one of my biggest gifts is to not attack when I hear the familiar stuff that I learned.
Okay, so when did you first get that, and it wasn't registering with you the way that it used to?
When you told me to read the Confederate Constitution and the state secession papers in school, like this is going to show how little, people pay attention to the Civil War outside of working in the field. I didn't even know, like, nobody knows there's a Confederate Constitution if you don't pay attention. Nobody reads state secession papers. You just learn what you learn in school. You learn what you're surrounded by with your family. You hear things, you pick up on it, because most people, to be honest, just don't care.
Right. So if you were reading what Tennessee said, because Tennessee is the last one, they don't really say a whole lot. But
that's what we get, Tennessee history.
But Mississippi, totally different.
They
Texas,
all about it.
Totally different. But even if you
different.
drill down further, and if you listen to what the governor of Tennessee was saying, it all gets back to the same place, which is that slavery is the thing that's driving the whole political movement. So what was it like when you started to really understand or accept that history was different?
Yeah, well, what made me sad is...
Which secondarily, how did it make you feel as someone who was born here?
Yeah, the thing that I think bothered me was that if they would have given us that information, if you would have gotten to read the Confederate Constitution in school, you're just focusing on the U.S. Constitution, and but seeing the other side of it, learning about what was going on behind the scenes in the Confederate government would have been so beneficial, which is one reason why I don't like, you should be teaching the opposing view in schools. Not just, we don't want you to see that, we don't want you to know that. You should be seeing, look, this is what the Confederates were saying, this is what the U.S. was saying. Read both constitutions, tell me where the difference is. And you're going to immediately see the slavery thing. Okay,
so then we're going to spin way forward. So at some point you become the director of education, which in my tenure, there have probably been a half a dozen who were all full-timers, and here you are still working part-time and doing a job as well as has ever been done.
Thank you.
But think about, to talk about the curriculum issue in Tennessee. Like, I don't really think that a fifth grader or an eighth grader is reading the Confederate Constitution or the ordinances of secession or the Declaration of Causes issued by Southern states, which are two separate things.
Right.
But they are learning that slavery was the front and center issue. So talk a little bit about that change from when, because of course, I wasn't raised here, and I should say that I think when I went to school, when I was taught Civil War history, which would have been in the 80s, it wasn't taught that somehow the South and Southerners were bad, but it was clear that slavery was the issue that broke the Union. And so talk about the evolution of what you maybe didn't learn versus what a child today is hearing in the state of Tennessee.
Right. Well, we grew up, I feel like when I was in school, we learned, it wasn't like we weren't learning about slavery. It's not like that we weren't technically learning that the war was fought over slavery. There was just reasons why, that went along with it.
And so the reasons were?
The states' rights. The states had a right to decide what they were going to do.
Okay, so this is an important bridge from what was being taught, let's say, in the 1960s or 1970s versus probably the 1990s. So we're getting
Yeah.
closer.
Basically what I feel like I
also,
remember.
by the way, anything about the Battle of Franklin?
No.
Okay.
No,
right.
not at all. What I feel like I remember learning was it wasn't that the Civil War wasn't over slavery. It was more focused on, did the states have the right to choose to secede over government overreach? Or, it wasn't that they downplayed slavery. It just wasn't, you could have put any issue in there, put like gun rights.
Right.
And take out slavery, and that would have been the same argument as they were having.
So it's almost like a side deflection.
Yeah,
so we're acknowledging that slavery is really important,
Mm-hmm.
but what we're going to focus on is whether the states had the right to do it. And I think that ignores a truly important point, which is the moral equation of slavery. And I know somebody out there is like, this is so ridiculous. The Constitution isn't about morals and all that. Well, the Declaration of Independence sure as heck is.
Yeah, it is.
All right, and the Constitution is built on that, and years of time that passed, and that slavery at its core was a legal or constitutional issue, but it is also a moral issue. And I think when you're just focusing on what the state, which is an instrument of government, has the right to do, there have been a lot of times in the history of this country when the state, whatever that version of the state is, it could be the state of the federal government, doesn't necessarily mean because they have the right means it's right.
Right.
And that is still what he's doing, what Lincoln is doing, is he's talking about the moral issue of slavery while conceding that there is a legal right to it. But that doesn't mean that it's right.
That it's right, exactly.
And I think, so you're in an interesting, you're going to school at an interesting time. So then talk about what it was like. So you begin to see it. You're not the education coordinator, but talk about what it was like. Gosh, think about 5 years ago today.
I know.
Okay. So 5 years ago today, we're like on the cusp of the world going bananas. But 2020 was a crazy year because, putting aside COVID and the election that year, the country gets into a full-blown reckoning over Confederate monuments.
Yes.
Once again, race pops up. So talk about that perspective from
yours,
but also a professional perspective.
That's also an interesting thing, because to dive down into like the whole Confederate flag, whole Confederate statue type thing, just from somebody growing up in the South, in this area, there was never a negative connotation put onto the Confederate flag growing up here. It was never a slavery thing to us. It was never connected really even to the Civil War, but it's been so far removed. It was just a thing that you had as that whole heritage. It's part of my heritage.
Or it's like Dukes of Hazzard.
Absolutely.
If heaven ain't a lot like Dixie.
It was, we never,
Sweet Home Alabama,
ever remember anyone saying anything about Confederate flag equals you're pro-slavery.
So what did it...
It was nothing like that.
How did it impact you as that... Or did it impact you as that year unfolded? Because I'm going somewhere with this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, I'll to walk through the whole process. Like, at the beginning, you initially put your hackles up, like defense mode, because you think that you're connecting yourself with the outrage, because when they say Confederate, what we talk about is, one thing Christy and I always speak on is being able to separate being a Southerner and the Confederacy.
I made this point at the anniversary where I said the South didn't lose the war, the Confederacy did.
Yeah, and that's the hard part, is because people like me want to be proud of our heritage. We love being from the South. We love Tennessee. But we feel like if we say stuff like that we're getting attacked because we're pro-Confederacy, because of the, 4 years of the Civil War. And the problem we're having is disconnecting those two things. Being able to be proud and be happy of your Southern heritage, but also disappointed in that time period and recognizing that they should not have done that. That was wrong. You were on the wrong side, buddy. Right?
Or maybe is it this? It's not just those 4 years. It's not just 1861 to 1865 when former U.S. soldier turns Confederate. President of the United States ultimately is assassinated. Lots of destruction and lots of burning. Civilian, wealthy, never fights for the Confederacy, but is born and raised in Tennessee.
Right.
All right. But maybe it's that the South didn't lose the war. The Confederacy did.
Yeah.
But the South, the white South especially, held on to the Confederacy.
Yes.
And still does. So I'm going to go to this, I warned you.
Oh, yeah.
This is the sort of stuff that historians will have to shake out years from now. So think about what happens on January 6, 2021. Why is it, do you think, that someone thought bringing a Confederate flag, what is that symbolism that they're bringing the Confederate flag to essentially a Trump rally?
Right.
And how do historians, how does an education coordinator reckon with the present and the past and the symbolism of what the heck is going on?
Okay, so I have a very good theory on this. And that's from 12 years of talking to people that come through our sites.
Aren't the people great?
They are.
They'll teach you all sorts of things if you'll listen.
They will. I think that, let's just point out that guy that you're talking about. I think that
we don't have a John C. Calhoun image. I think the thing that always struck me about that one photograph of that one knucklehead inside the Capitol was they snapped the photo of him holding the Confederate flag while he was literally under John C. Calhoun's portrait. You can't make that up.
I come back to all of the people that we try to educate on a daily basis. I don't think I could... I mean, I'd have to talk to him. I'd have to understand him. But to me, I look at that and I'm like, oh, you don't understand what that means. Like, you see rebellion. So, you see somebody that is trying to stand up to an all-powerful government type thing. You don't see the other side of it because you probably weren't taught the other side of it. So I see ignorance. Or not ignorance. I don't think he's stupid. Uneducation.
Ignorant doesn't mean you're stupid.
I see like uneducated in certain areas. It doesn't mean you're stupid because you don't know. You just haven't been taught. You're learning the general, the most basic stuff about Civil War history. In school, you get like what? I mean, they get a 9 weeks or a 6. It's not enough.
Okay, so then let me go to this, and we should wind this up because. Since we're in Chalkboard History, Volume 2, I don't have a soundboard anymore, so I have no idea how much. I have no idea how much time has elapsed. So here we are. It's now 2025. So we just passed the 160th anniversary of the Battle of Franklin, and we're doing something right now where we haven't really talked about anything militaria. We're not talking about the battle today. What we're doing is we're talking about a battle over history.
Yeah.
And over what the world was in 59. The world is in the United States. And what the country went through in those 4 years, and then what emerged, and what I grew up in, what I was taught, where you grew up, what you were taught. And it reminds me of, I was going to ask you about the Fuller story, but I'm going to jump forward. But I will say that during the Fuller story, this came full circle for me because I had a guy, Southerner, and a nice guy, but he's like, why does it always have to be about monuments or the flag with the blacks, is how he put it, with the blacks? And I said, Have you ever considered that those monuments and that flag also don't have a great appeal to someone like me? And the last time I checked, I'm not black. Now, that doesn't mean that I want to tear them down, because I don't. And I don't want to just, if your feelings are hurt over the Confederate flag, I think that's really on you. But I also can point out what it really, in many ways, has always stood for. But he'd never considered that.
Yeah.
Where he was seeing everything through the lens of just white and black. And I've learned that some of this is also about geography. Some of it is about our knowledge of what was going on. So it's 2025. And as we said earlier, it's Inauguration Day, which is a historic thing too. As we go from one president to another, we don't have to like him. We can complain and fuss and moan. And soon there'll be a new president who's already been president, which he goes down in history with Grover Cleveland as the only non-consecutive term president. So I'm thinking about somebody born in 2015. Okay. And they're going to visit Carnton or Carter House or Rippavilla in the spring, perhaps. With their parents, but let's say they're with the school group. What about that kid? What about that kid and what are they being taught? What does it mean to them? What does the Civil War mean? Because this is really key from an education perspective. Because we educate not just children, we educate adults. But is that child better off? Are they better off in their knowledge of
I think they're
the 19th century?
Here's what I tell the kids on the school group, okay? I get them for an hour. We rotate them through stations, so I can get them 15 minutes for the slavery station. I always do the slavery station.
Why?
Because if anything is questioned, I know what was said because I did it.
Gotcha.
I tell them on every tour, I get you for 15 minutes. I cannot tell you everything I know or have learned in the 12 years that I've been here. I tell them that my job is to build them a very solid foundation of facts, because most kids that we get are 5th grade, right? Yeah. And I say, you have years of a journey of history to learn. But if you get to your senior year and your foundation is built on opinion, it's all going to crumble.
Right.
So we want to make sure that they know the facts about the beginnings of slavery. And so I remember I had a dad on a school group one time, and you always get what about the Irish? What about the what?
What about the Irish slaves?
I tell people all the time, we have 15 minutes, dude. Like, I got 15 minutes. And so we talk about American slavery because that's where we live. You could do days on world slavery. Like, we're not talking about that. I don't have unlimited time with these kids. I want them to walk out of there knowing the basic numbers and the difference between American slavery and world slavery, and why it is so significant that American slavery is different.
Okay, but so you just made me think of something. So this is really the last question. He never said it. He never said it. He never said it. Nobody on this board would have ever talked about Irish slaves.
Right, I know.
None of them would have ever talked about black Confederates. Isn't it interesting that as we work through the 50 to 60 years since civil rights, when we finally confronted this issue head on, that the last vestiges of the old republic are these constant deflections about what slavery really was.
Yep.
And if you look at anything that was published in 1859 or 1860,
they'll tell you.
And it wasn't just American slavery. It was African slavery. It was Negro slavery. It was so clear. And that is the part, when as frustrated as I get, I realize we're punching through, because that person's child, anybody can get misdirected.
Yeah.
But the children of that generation or two, they're being raised in a demonstrably different world. And that doesn't mean that one side was just and right and the other side was evil and awful.
Right.
But there's no defense and deflection about slavery.
All we have to do is plant the seed.
Right.
For these, and not planting some sort of agenda into their head or this progressive woke stuff, because that's just, that's not me.
But how do you address that if someone says that they say that telling the truth is woke? How do you respond to that?
Because I've had that on tour, and I tell people that Christy and I go to the National Archives every year to pull pension applications. And the National Archive guy, whatever his name is, I can't remember his name, but
the master
the
archivist.
master dude, he laughed at us when Christy made a comment that 10% of our national history is digitized, that we can actually go see. The rest of it you can't even get to unless you request it. And so I tell people all the time on tour, before you pounce and get your panties in a wad that somebody's trying to change history, sit back, give it a second, because maybe it's just something new that we didn't know that we're trying to correct. It's not changing, it's correct. I mean, if you said history wrong, you have to correct it. It's not changing it just because that's what you've always thought that it was. It's okay to see proof, read a document and say, oh crap, we got to fix that.
You mean
that's
John Bell
right.
Hood's on laudanum?
Yeah,
Right.
you fix it.
Right, that was never true. And somebody said, well, I read that somewhere. Well, sorry.
It's a lot of things you read.
Right.
Just because you read it on the internet don't mean it's true.
Or just because you heard it from someone.
Right.
And often at a historic site, which is why we work diligently to dig right down to what the facts are. And that the facts in many ways are irrefutable. So what do you think the future is of... Okay, last question. What's the future of, education and interpretation of the young, but also of adults at antebellum or Civil War sites like Rippavilla? What is the future?
So Rippavilla, we have this vision. I'm hoping it comes to fruition, but Rippavilla, I think, is going to be an excellent site for the next part of history through Reconstruction. That's what I would love to see happen at Rippavilla, making it a Reconstruction site for kids to do the first part. Civil War, you have Carnton, you go see the battle, you learn about that kind of stuff, but then see the aftermath of it, trying to see what these two groups of people, white and black, living in this new world, having either ends of the spectrum, kind of similar to today. Right. You have the extremes of both sides pouring fear into these average, normal, white, black people trying to live in society. And how all of that is, how they journey through that change.
And isn't Reconstruction really the bridge to civil rights?
Yes.
Because that's that one, you can go from Civil War to civil rights if you want to, but you've got to understand something about Reconstruction. And I think you're right, because people like Nat Chairs and Susan Chairs, their children, their contemporaries, their friends, and everybody from Maine to California knew at least something that was unfolding in that decade after the war, and it was extraordinarily controversial. And it does make some of what we're going through today. Yeah. It can pale today's, tough moments can almost pale in comparison to that endless strife. And then I think you can see why people just give up, because they get exhausted and they acquiesce or they walk away. And we're also dealing with some of that too. So any last comments, any last thoughts, education coordinator?
I would just say, especially to a lot of people that grew up in the same surrounding that I did, have an open mind. Don't immediately jump to the woke word that we hear all the time. Sit back, listen, and then explore on your own. Stop listening to what people tell you. And I would say, and I'm going to get slack for this, but your grandmother wasn't always right. You know, we love her. We cherish the things that they taught us, but they were just as misguided, I think, as some of the things that we were taught growing up.
Right, and they were misguided not because they were bad people, but because they lived in that time.
They lived in that time, and they were listening to their parents or their grandparents.
I've told people for years, if we're honest, if you even move beyond race, there is a moment when anybody that looked like me would have made sure that someone who looked like you could never vote.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say that maybe we shouldn't have waited until 1920.
Right.
You know, maybe that should have happened years before.
Yeah.
And that's part of just acknowledging the past, too, because I bet there was a woman somewhere in 1860 or 1880 who just wanted to vote.
Yeah.
And they were held back simply because of who they were.
Right.
And that's important to learn, too. So we want everybody, give us your comments, tell us what you think. We're going to go through a whole series of Meet the Staff.
Meet the Staff.
Meet the Staff. See what we do over the next few weeks. Thanks for listening
Thank
to
you.
Chalkboard History, Volume 2.